Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. Today's video is about one of the worst caving disasters in UK history. The only cave I've ever been in was probably about 25 years ago, and we went on a tour of the Cheddar Gorge caves, and I actually thought it looked really fun to go caving. It was only years later when I watched some proper potholing videos on YouTube that I realised how claustrophobic it can actually get. The Mossdale Caverns are located in a wild moorland area called Grassington Moor, deep in the Yorkshire Dales. There's a large stream that runs through the moor called Mossdale Beck. If you follow the stream for long enough, eventually it hits some limestone cliffs called the Mossdale Scar, and then the water runs underground through cracks and fissures in the rock for about 4 or 5 kilometres. Over thousands of years, these running waters have eroded the rocks underground and formed a network of narrow tunnels and caves. You couldn't ask for a more picturesque location for a cave entrance, but the caverns beneath have an ominous and sinister reputation, all because of one ill-fated day on the 24th of June 1967. Early that morning, a group of 10 young men and women had gathered to explore the caves. The leaders of the expedition were Dave Adamson and Jeff Burrow. Their mission was to head to the far end of the caverns and use blasting equipment to find new passages. Helping to carry the equipment were John Ogden, Colin Vickers, Bill Frakes and Michael Ryan. The other members of the group decided to stay behind and explore the more spacious caves closer to the cavern entrance. And so they parted ways, the 4 staying behind and the 6 going on deeper into the caverns. I'll try and describe the journey that the 6 took as best I can, but as someone who's never been caving, I'm probably not going to do a very accurate job here, but I've been reading through various reports and watching videos to get some sense of what it's like to follow in their path. The first leg of the journey appears to be relatively spacious. There's large caverns such as the Boulder Hall and larger tunnels that are big enough to stand up in. Some parts of the cavern are filled with water, such as the ominously named Drown or Glory section, with water reaching up to the cavers' necks. Sometimes it would require them to dip down under the water to get through some rocky sections. The real challenge was yet to come though. The second leg of the journey is a section so horrible that it's considered to be one of the most arduous caving challenges in the UK. One that very few people have actually dared to take on. The tunnels get really narrow here, so cavers have to crawl on their hands and knees to progress. Once again, the names given to these sections give some idea of their arduous nature. First is the rough crawl, which narrows further still into a tunnel known as the knee wrecker. The next part though is what Mossdale is most notorious for. It's known as the Marathon Crawl. This is a tunnel so narrow that for large parts of it cavers have to push themselves along on their bellies. It's divided into 2 sections, the near marathon and the far marathon tunnels, with a small 5-foot chamber in between that offers a breather. Each section of the tunnel is about 900 feet long, so it's about half a kilometre in total. I've tried to imagine what it's like to crawl down such a tunnel deep below the earth, but it's so far from anything I've experienced in my life that my mind just reels at the thought of it. I found this really good blog post written by Simon Beck. He's someone who's explored the marathon crawl extensively, and what he's written is called Marathon Obsession. I'll put a link to the full piece in the description. I recommend going and reading the whole thing because it's really interesting to read through, but I want to read some excerpts from it here because I think he does a really good job of describing an experience that my mind has such a hard time imagining. So he writes, I've only two choices, carry on or turn around. Both offer torment, but only one attainment. There's nowhere to hide from this crushing environment, no calling time out. Every hard-fought inch must be retraced, and the further one goes, the deeper in one gets. One noticeable change is that of the general ambience. The forbidding nature of this cave becomes further stained. The mind reigns in this physically repressed environment. One moment it's your friend, the next your foe, your motivation and all your worst fears. An overwhelming feeling of sickness throughout was how one ex-caving partner admitted to feeling after a trip partway down Leakey's marathon. If there is such a thing, then the crux of the marathon comes at the end, being a few 100 feet of flat-out crawling. I was alone the first time I traversed the marathon crawls in their entirety, and I remember well, during that final stage, my thoughts relating to the state of the weather above and the inner fight I was having to keep going. On occasions I've laid still in the far marathon, the only way to truly imagine all but the very thing itself. Numbness is all I felt, no terror or feelings of regret for putting myself in this place. I will never ever forget being plunged into complete darkness here when my duo switch was knocked off. The raven-like claws of darkness gripped me in an instant. You emerge from Far Marathon with mixed feelings. Relief is predominant, but the unsettling fact you've to return the way you came follows quickly behind. And so this was the environment that the 6 men found themselves in on that day, crawling along on their bellies, dragging the bulky equipment behind them. No doubt many of them had that same creeping sense of anxiety that Simon described. Not just because of the claustrophobic, oppressive atmosphere, but because they knew of the very real dangers. Mossdale Caverns was highly prone to flooding. Back on the surface by 5 PM, the 4 that had stayed behind had finished exploring the caves and they were heading back to the hut where they were staying. It was just starting to rain. Nothing too bad, but the dark clouds overhead were worrying them. The other team would be in the cave till around midnight and the weather could turn at any moment. By 7:30, a huge downpour had started. Morag Forbes, who was Dave Adamson's fiancée, got worried and returned to the Mossdale Scar to check on the conditions. Although the rain was heavy, things didn't look too bad at the cave entrance, so once again she returned to the hut. At 9 PM the rain still hadn't let up, in fact it was getting worse. She walked back to the cave entrance to check on it, but what she saw when she got there was horrifying. Where there was once a small stream, there was now a giant lake. The entire cave entrance was completely submerged below the water. She ran 2 miles to the nearest farmhouse and rang for help. Rescuers were on the scene by 11 PM and they had to begin the arduous task of diverting the flow of water away from the cave entrance. This was a huge operation using JCBs and sandbags. It took them all night to divert the water, but by the next morning they could access the caverns again. A team of rescuers went into the caves. They were hoping to find the lost men had camped out in one of the high-ceilinged caverns. Finding nobody there, they descended further into the tight tunnels of the rough crawl and knee wrecker. As the caverns narrowed around them, so did their hopes of finding any survivors. Eventually they began the long crawl down the marathon. Some way into the far marathon, their fears were realised. Wedged into a rift in the side of the tunnel were the drowned bodies of Michael Ryan and Jeff Barrow. They must have both squeezed in there together in a final desperate attempt to get some air. Obviously, the discovery of these bodies must have been highly traumatic, so it's testament to the grit of the rescuers that they then steeled themselves, squeezed themselves past the 2 dead men and tried to locate the other 4. Towards the end of Far Marathon, they found 3 more bodies: Bill Frakes, Colin Vickers and Dave Adamson. After identifying the bodies, the weary team returned to the surface. It was only later that they realised that in the confusion and stress of the day, they'd only accounted for 5 bodies. They still hadn't found John Ogden. By that point, the dam diverting the water was beginning to break down, so fearing another flood, they had to wait till the next day before a team could go in once more. As John Ogden hadn't been found with the others, they hoped that he'd managed to find a safe spot somewhere higher in the caverns. There was a slim chance that he was still alive, and if he wasn't, they at least needed to find the body, so they searched these smaller side tunnels that split off from the marathon crawl. Eventually they did find him. He was just a few feet away from where the final 3 bodies had been located. Wedged upright in a tight fissure was the body of John Ogden. The crack looked far too narrow for a person to fit inside, but somehow, in his final desperate battle for air, he'd wedged himself in there before dying. The reason why he hadn't been seen first was because his body was so covered in silt and debris that only 1 boot and the white of his helmet was visible. Looking at the locations of the bodies, it makes me wonder what their final moments were like. As I've said, I have a hard time even imagining what it's like to crawl down that tunnel, so the idea of drowning in such a place is even more incomprehensible. I wonder if they were suddenly engulfed by rushing water, or if it slowly rose up to cover them as they desperately tried to crawl to safety. There's a tunnel just above the marathon crawl called the High Level Mud Caverns. Maybe they were trying to get to the higher level, but they just weren't quick enough. It's difficult to tell because the water flow could have washed their bodies downstream from the original positions. Anyway, it's easy to sit behind a computer screen and speculate on what happened whilst looking at these abstract points on a map. It's easy even to forget that these were real people. Most likely their final actions were the result of a mindless blind panic rather than a careful plan of action. The decision of what to do with the bodies was a difficult one. It would have been impossible to bring them to the surface, so at first they simply left them where they lay and sealed up the cave entrance. For 3 years the bodies remained in the marathon tunnel, continually washed by the same waters they drowned in. It was only then that another team entered the caverns, and in what must have been an exhausting and distressing operation, they buried the bodies in a part of the high-level caverns known as the Sanctuary. After that, the entrance was sealed up once more, and ever since, the landowner hasn't allowed anyone access to Mossdale Caverns. That doesn't mean nobody's been back though. In the intervening years, other entrances have been found, and a number of renegade potholers have been back to explore its tunnels. Obviously, given its history, it's gained quite the reputation, perhaps rightly so. Many cavers see it as too risky to venture into, but even without the unpredictable flood risk, there's something else to these caves too. Not only is it a cave system, but it's also a tomb for 6 people that died far too young. It gives the caverns a sinister quality that goes beyond its dark walls and narrow confines. Some even say that the Mossdale Caverns are haunted. There are people who've sworn that they've heard voices echoing in the tunnels when they've been in there all alone. In fact, there's even a video that seems to capture some of these voices. This was uploaded by Holy Moly Alex in 2019. Listen carefully. likely these noises are just the sound of the water combined with the weird acoustics of the caverns, but it does make for some creepy listening. So I thought I'd wrap up this video by answering a question that I bet some of you have already typed in the comments. What impulse drove those 6 men into the bowels of Mossdale Caverns? Why in the hell would anyone want to subject themselves to hours of crawling through those dark, cold, unforgiving tunnels? I was wondering the same thing myself actually. When I emailed Holy Moly Alex about using that footage with the spooky voices, we got chatting a bit and he gave me a really good answer, so I thought I'd read it here. About his motivation for caving, he said, "With me it's the otherworldliness to it. It's a place you can go to get away from the stresses of modern day life, as there is of course no mobile signal down a cave. The biggest draw factor is the possibility of finding and exploring new passages no one has ever explored before. To be the first man ever in the entire history to enter the section of cave and see the beauty. It is after all what drew those men into Mossdale, as they were trying to push beyond the current limit of the cave. The other thing I love about it is how it's a great all-body workout, as you can pass through climbs, go up and down rope pitches, free climbs, squeezes. Finally, it's the camaraderie of trying to get through a difficult passage with your mates, helping each other out, getting the 10-kilogram rope bags past obstacles. It really fosters friendships, and I've made some great friends in the caving community. Of course, sometimes you just want to challenge yourself. Solo caving is a different experience, but it's not that much more dangerous provided you leave a call out and don't try and push yourself. I consider cavers as the last pioneers, as other than deep space and the deep oceans, unexplored underground caves are the last places still completely untouched by man, and it's a place that an average Joe, if they're willing to put the effort in, can get to without being a millionaire. So I hope that gives some insight into the motivation of the 6 people that died that day, and those rare few that have explored Mossdale Caverns since then. The Mossdale incident is Britain's worst caving disaster, but it's easy to listen to horror stories like this and come away with the impression that caving is this terribly dangerous pastime, but I don't think it's like that really. The men who lost their lives in Mossdale Caverns were the victims of a tragic accident. Sure, they took a risk, but sometimes you've got to take risks to live life to the fullest. Otherwise we'd all just be stuck in our houses all day, and imagine what that would be like. Thank you for watching the video. If you've never gone caving, I might have put you off for life, or maybe I've made you kind of curious about trying it. Honestly, since I started researching the topic, I've become a bit obsessed with watching caving videos, and although I'm pretty claustrophobic, I kind of want to try it out. Definitely not Mossdale though. Thanks once again to Simon Beck for letting me read from his blog post, and to Holy Moly Alex and Adele Ward for letting me use their footage. I'll put links to all of them in the description, so go check them out. They've got loads more footage from inside the caverns. It's well worth a watch, so go check them out. Also, thanks to everyone on Patreon and PayPal who's supporting the channel. It's a little known fact, but if your name appears at the end of one of my videos, you will actually become immortal for the rest of your life. So congratulations to all these people, and thank you once again for helping me keep the lights on. If you'd like something else to watch, check out one of the videos on screen now. Otherwise, I'll see you later in your recommendeds. Until next time, goodbye.